Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for another North Carolina Housing Table virtual workshop. This is a series where we bring dynamic featured voices to you from across the state every month. So please make sure that you are also connected with us on social media by following NC Housing Table on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We always post a replay of the virtual workshop on YouTube. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel. You can also catch our last workshop on there as well. I will go ahead and throw it over to the founder and executive director, Denzel Burnside, for a few opening words.
Thank you very much, Lily May. I want to thank our guests, Bert and Theo, for agreeing to help us continue this series that we've been doing here, trying to keep folks informed and updated, and even just archived for our records that you folks don't know how many folks will go back and reach out and say they'll look at the information and want to get more from the speakers. So this is we're hoping to grow this, and hopefully after we go through this first series within this year, we can circle back next year and bring folks back on and maybe do some different portions of conversation. As we may say, I think it's no secret, I'm the executive director of the North Carolina Housing Table. I want to make sure I give a shout out to one of our board members, Martin Johnson, who was here. We are a C4 advocacy organization focusing on housing supply. What that essentially means is that we have a coalition of groups that work on this issue, right, left, and middle across the state, that we basically advocate to come up with the best ideas that go forward around housing supplies. Some of those ideas, as of late, that we've tried to position and turn into policy have been informed by both of the speakers who are here today, who I want to give a thank you to. And I'll talk a little bit more about Bert in a moment. But some of the policies that we're right now tracking, just to kind of give an update of our work, is HB 369, it's the parking lot minimum bill. We were also trying to push an ADU bill that did not make it past the floor in the House, single stair as well, which did not make it out of committee. And we have several bills on the Senate side sponsored by Senator Mayfield that we're hoping to see make it through into a greater package. What we advocate and primarily stand for is trying to bring and open up all types and diversity of housing supply. So whether it's single family homes, whether it's multifamily homes, whether it's apartment units, whether it's ADUs, and also looking at surrounding policy and processes that are aligned to that to help affect the housing supply in the state of North Carolina. Two things I just want to make sure I mention before I turn it over to our first speaker is, one, we ran a poll with the differentiators data. I keep lifting that up, and if anyone would like to see it, we found across the state about 81% of folks who are voters all agree that housing is a primary concern and a crisis in this state. I think that's important because this is what issue that we found out from folks that is more um, purple than blue or red. There's major consensus across the state, while also knowing that we are experiencing expansive growth. I think about 51 or so folks move, and I might be shooting a number offhand in terms of the tri-county area to the state on a daily. About 760,000 plus homes need to be built in the state. And so when we're talking about population growth and the expected expansion of the homes and diversity of homes that we need, we're not keeping up with that. But I believe that the work that we're doing and others that we're able to partner with and others that we're hopefully going to be able to work with, and those of you that are in this room today, that you can share, take the message, bring folks back, connect them to our organization. We'll be doing some around the state roundtables, hopefully, starting off in Charlotte soon. We'll be able to get more folks to the table that are either for, preferably, and if not, those who may be against, but maybe just a little confused about where they align with some of the policies that we're advocating for. So that is my spiel. I'm trying to keep my tone because I see my colleague Susan here, and try not to speak 1,000 miles an hour today. But Lily Mae, do you want me to go ahead and kind of set up Bert, or do you want to do it?
Sure.
Okay. So I want to give a big kudos to Bert Fox. One, because Bert and me came into relationship with each other in the previous organization of Wake Up Wake County. When I was the executive director there, she was the vice chair. And when I first met her uh, in her office, which is actually around the corner from my house, um, I um, I remember, you know, I remember being very nervous in the space and everything, and just remembering how accommodating she was to me. And then even as that went on, I said there were a couple people as I was moving from doing climate work, working on methane, that helped lift me up and kind of push me and give me a little bit more confidence to look at sustainability, housing, transportation, and all the areas that kind of go into more cities, county work. And Bert is, I think, one of the smartest people in the room. And I don't just say that lightly. I think she is the smartest person in the room. Her wealth of experience being a city planner for the city of Raleigh, her ability to be able to, at the drop of a dime, I'll text Bert at like 10 o'clock at night and be like, I think she's giving me grace to call her Birdie. I'll be like, Birdie, I need some insight on this policy. And she'll send me back a draft memo with notes and everything. And I'm able to go and take it to some folks, whether congressional or in the state capitol. So I just want to lift up her and tell her thank you first for always being available and accessible and a willing partner, no matter what the relationships may look like. These are the people that you get. I say I get to work with, who are pleasant and a pleasure to work with. And she is a principal over her Catalyst design. So I'm going to let her go ahead and open up and talk more about her work and how she's been in the middle of this fight probably before I got here, and all the planning skills. And so I turn it over now to Bert Fox.
Awesome. Thank you, Denzel. You are, as always, too kind. All right, I'm going to see if I can successfully share a screen here. And it is not, there we go. Now it's letting me. Okay. Unfortunately, I can't see everyone's face while I'm talking and giving the presentation. So I think it's okay with a group this size to just unmute yourself and ask questions along the way. I know we're going to have a Q&A kind of at the end, but I'm working here just to give a really high level overview about planning in North Carolina. And I'm doing that not really knowing exactly where everybody's coming from or what your knowledge base is. So again, this is going to be really high level, and I hope to be able to continue this in the Q&A to get down into detail, which I think most people will want to do. So somewhere along the way, I tricked Denzel and other people into thinking I'm a housing expert, which I'm not. Actually, I came to housing by way of transportation and transportation architecture. That is the gateway drug to housing, as most people know. So I worked for many years on the West Coast, working on light rail, bus rapid transit, ferry ship terminals, etc. And what you learn really quickly in the transportation planning world is all decisions about transportation infrastructure have to do with where people are and where they want to go, which again is housing and where we allow it. And that makes it possible for us to make certain types of investments in transit. Now, when we allow our housing to be spread out, and I'll just use the word sprawl, then it's more expensive to create transit, and then it's more expensive for everybody to get around. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how state level decisions shape some local housing options, and then talk a little bit about why it's hard to build housing in our neighborhoods. And I left a blank. So that blank could be affordable housing, attainable housing, market rate housing, etc. I borrowed this from the Minnesota Housing Partnership. And you can see the spectrum of housing. So housing, all humans need housing. Humans have a right to housing is what I believe. That's my starting point. But you do have many folks who are unhoused or need supportive housing for a number of reasons. So if you look at this type of graphic put together by MHP, you can see from very low income, the types of housing, and then the types of strategies that are used there, to the 30 to 60% area median income, AMI, up to the 60 to 80% area median income. And that 80% is sometimes called workforce housing. So different types of strategies work to address those different types of housing needs and income levels. If I summarize all of that information that MHP put together, again, it's a spectrum. And that spectrum goes everywhere from the unhoused through workforce housing up into what I'll call the 100% median income, which is I make the average of what everyone makes around me. I can afford a house. And then above that, which is called luxury housing. And so with those types of housing, just breaking it into two really big buckets, it's non-market rate housing and market rate housing. Now, non-market rate housing means it doesn't necessarily follow the same rules associated with supply and demand. So that's sometimes called like subsidized housing. In certain countries, there's also social housing, and it fits in that bucket. Market rate housing, right, which is probably the types of housing that many people who are on this call live in, that follows the rules of supply and demand. So in the current landscape of what we see with housing across the state, and I'll be very specific to Wake County and Raleigh, which is where I'm located, you can see that demand for housing is outpacing the supply, which means that the cost of housing rises. We're also seeing those costs of housing that's rising faster than our wages are rising. You can think back into the 1950s, early 1960s, where a single earner could support a family on one wage, and just a regular professional, and that probably was a blue-collar job. We also have limited housing types. So we're probably all familiar with the term missing middle. So the types of housing anywhere between a single family house and a large apartment building, all this stuff in the middle, which would allow you to have different price points. And then there's also growing inequality and displacement. Everyone's probably familiar with the term gentrification. So a little bit of bad news, and then I'll follow it with a little bit of interesting good news. This just came out, just a couple of blogs and Zillow, which I follow, kind of housing prices throughout our region. The one on the left is, this is just just came out in the past couple weeks. The annual income required to buy a median priced home in the US. So this is averaged across the entire United States. And so from April 2019 to April 2025, that increased by about 70%. However, if I look, and this just came out this past week from Zillow, I just picked a zip code in Raleigh, so I picked 27610. You can see the typical home value has gone down a little bit over the past year. So how can those two things be true at the same time? Also recently, this just came out in the past month. It's from Resi Club, and it was created with information provided on realtor.com, showing how local inventory tells the story. So from 2019, many northern metros are running somewhere around like 50 to 70% below pre-pandemic listings. Those are like the brown dots. And big swaths of the Sun Belt, which I would include us in North Carolina, those are showing some of the greenish and bluish dots, right? Which means, you know, there's a little bit of extra stock, a little bit of extra housing stock, which is likely new homes that haven't found buyers yet. So what that means is there's a little bit of pressure right now in the South, in the Sun Belt, where there's double-digit inventory growth, and you could see some price cuts associated with that. So things to watch out for at the federal level are what the mortgage rate is, so what the interest rate is, and then at the state level, what types of housing policy is moving forward now. So everyone's familiar, of course, with living in a house, and probably a lot of terms about urban planning. And if you think about why we plan, the goal of that is clarifying a vision and our priorities. So where do we want people to live? How do we want people to experience our city? And it's important that we align our decisions with our long-term goals here. The process of planning also builds transparency and public trust, and it helps us guide investments. And that's both public sector investments in things like transportation and private sector investments where certain types of housing are going to go. The key planning documents, and this is specific to North Carolina, anytime municipality is going to make land use decisions, they are required to have an adopted policy document, often a future land use map that's included in a comprehensive plan. This is your policy recommendation document. That document is operationalized into an ordinance. That's your regulatory document. Examples of those, just kind of locally around here, are the town of Cary's Land Development Ordinance, they call their LDO, or Raleigh's Unified Development Ordinance, which is their UDO. And so again, that comprehensive plan provides the blueprint, but the ordinance is the rule book. So when you want to make changes to things like land use, you're often making a change to the future land use map or going through the process of rezoning. And I just selected this from the City of Raleigh website. This is how you make a change to the comprehensive plan. So that document was created with numerous public touch points. So the creation of the current comprehensive plan that the City of Raleigh has right now, it's called the 2030 plan. There were over 300 public information meetings and workshops and focus groups, etc. Now, if you want to change a portion of that, there is also public input associated with that. And that happens during mailings and meetings that the applicant has with the community beforehand, then at the Planning Commission, which makes a recommendation to the City Council. There are public meetings, the public is invited to those. And then there's a public hearing and a final action at the City Council. So again, the public is included at every step along the way for both adopting a comprehensive plan and then making a change to it. But what actually happens like in reality when you're doing it? It's a little bit more complicated than that last graphic. So you want to put housing somewhere. It's currently not allowed to be there, but policy documents say, hey, we want more housing. Okay. So again, there's a lot of stakeholder input. You look at adopted policy, so that's your comprehensive plan, and then there's technical analysis that happens. This goes through a very formal review cycle. It goes to a body such as a planning commission or a planning board. They make an advisory recommendation, which is mostly, hey, I see you guys have an adopted document that says you want housing around transit. These people want to put housing around transit. We think you should approve it. Or we think you should deny it for the following reasons. Or this thing could be approved if you added some conditions to it. And then there's a legislative decision. Again, the public is invited to that meeting where the council or the board of commissioners makes a decision about that particular project. Now, they're thinking when they make that decision at the local level, they're thinking about things like, how are we going to maintain the roads associated with this new development, or how are we managing our growth in general? Is this aligned with our other plans, like transit plans? And also, is the public going to be mad at me if I make this decision? Because it's really important for me to be reelected next year. So taking a step back and what state housing policy and how that affects this. So the state laws define what local governments can and can't do. And North Carolina is, I'll say, more restrictive in nature than some of the other states I've worked in. The state also controls things like how you can control zoning and the funding tools that are available to municipalities to build things such as infrastructure or things with a public good, such as public housing or subsidized housing. There's also state agencies like North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, which plays a key role in those housing types that I had that were on kind of the left side of that housing spectrum. So when you're trying to use low-income housing tax credits for certain types of subsidized non-market rate housing. So these things at both the local level and the state level impact housing in your neighborhood. So less affordable housing means that the cost of rent and home prices go up. Again, that's related to that supply and demand. Everyone is pushed farther away, so commute times increase, wear and tear on roads increase, and your cost of transportation, so your monthly bills go up. And there are fewer options for seniors and young adults, which is what we're seeing now, what we see a lot in my part of North Carolina, at least. So there's a lot of things that can be done, and I'm very specifically going to talk about just market rate housing here, because the tools like the levers and switches in the big machine that allow you to make policy changes related to other forms of housing could be 5 other webinars. So for the purpose of this one, when you're looking at increasing the supply of market rate housing, the tool that's available is modernizing zoning laws. Some things that a lot of folks are doing, and again, I'm just making this very, very broad, are removing parking requirements. And so Denzel mentioned some of the current House bills related to parking. There's also broadening and redefining what housing is. So if you look at a local zoning ordinance, there are likely very nuanced definitions of multiple different types of housing, which is great to signal to people what type of housing you might have next to you. But I'm going to push back on that and say housing is housing. So is there really a need for me to separate townhouses from single family homes? I'm going to argue no, because they're both places where people live. Another thing that can be done is streamlining approvals. And so by doing that, what we're talking about is by right development options. So allowing things by right, so it doesn't need to go through that really lengthy process to be able to build some houses. So I'm going to just conclude really quickly and say, I think it's really helpful to reconsider how we talk about housing and consider it more like infrastructure. So when you think about transportation infrastructure, you design a system, and that system is broader than boundaries that are drawn on a map. And so that is why transportation planning involves larger sections of an area or a state, et cetera. So for instance, me in city A, I wouldn't decide, well, I would like the highway to be 10 lanes going near me. And then, city B right next door, they're like, we're only going to have it 2 lanes, right? So there needs to be a coordination of things like that. And I would argue the same is true for housing. We need to think about how housing is implemented from a systems approach. And so to do that as a systems approach, you need to look at that at the state level. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people's faces again. There we go. And again, really broad overview. I hope that was helpful, Denzel and group. But I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw one person come off mute. I wanted to make sure, I know we had Theo to go as well. I'm going to give, if possible, David, Dr. David, did you want to make a comment? I saw you couldn't make sure. Does anybody want to make a comment? Because I was going to give space towards the end as well. If you could just write them down and hold them so we can make sure we give Theo, because I think this is a great segue from Bert being able to give us a preview of seeing it from the city up to the state level as well, the work that we focus on. And then now being able to have Theo, who lives in the wonderful city of Chapel Hill, which has some of the most Martins here. We talk a lot about Chapel Hills and the challenges that lie in zoning and conditional zoning processes in Theo's city. Love Chapel Hill, but I think they present a lot of complexity to the housing conversation. So if there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and segue into Councilman Theo Nollert and let him go ahead and kind of swing it from here. I want to just say thank you to him as well for being an ally and an outspoken voice and leader. His TikTok reels and Instagram reels and witty conversation. We're hoping to be able to do some more work with him on that and being able to bring these dialogues and also trying to work with municipal leaders on being able to communicate this, because most of the folks that come from that actually are in the state or General Assembly came from municipal leadership, and they still operate with that level of fear that if they make a change or they do something out of sorts that they're going to get whacked directly, like as if they're sitting at a city level, like someone's going to run in the building and start yelling and calling them all type of names. So I really appreciate leaders that were willing to step out and have that conversation. So I want to transition over to Theo and let him kind of segue and present how he wishes to go. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks, Denzel. It's a pleasure to be here. Bert, that was an awesome slide deck. I didn't bring slides. I just wanted to give you guys a little context on some of the background in Chapel Hill, the choices that we're facing, and my thoughts on why it's so important to have a group like this creating coalitions statewide for better housing policy, and a preview of a couple of things that I think would be really productive for us to find more partners to work with. So the values that I proceed from on the town council thinking about housing are basically that I think everybody should have access to safe and affordable housing. and that they should be able to live in a healthy, secure community. And I think that housing policy determines how much that's possible. And it has a lot to do with the cost of housing that people find. As Bert mentioned, affordable housing is a technical term, but I also think that for us as advocates and as people active in the public sphere, if you look at the New York City mayoral race right now, there's a candidate who's extremely viral because of how frequently he talks about affordable housing. And he doesn't mean it technically. He wants people to think about that however they think about it. And I think that's a messaging challenge for us to think about how we distinguish the technical from the intelligible for our audiences. So when I'm thinking about our relationship with the state, there are a couple things that I think about that influence housing cost. There's policy, and there's investment, and there's authority. Towns don't have the authority to do rent stabilization in North Carolina. They don't have significant authority to create tenant protections like just cause eviction ordinances. Those are pretty weak in North Carolina. We don't have a great latitude of authority to say, if people are getting displaced from this community, in order to create this new market rate building, we're going to set aside a fund to help support their costs. That has to be a sort of voluntary arrangement that's largely town funded typically. We don't have a lot of authority in this state as municipalities to do things. What we do have the authority to do is largely voluntary. And that's where the financial investment question comes in. In Chapel Hill, I'm going to read from my notes here for a second. We have around 1,200 units right now that are subsidized affordable units available to the public. There is a need gap of about 2,000 units, and the pressure to live in the triangle is so high that that number will keep growing. And as Bert mentioned, as prices rise faster than incomes, that pressure is only going to get more intense. And with supply constrained the way it is, costs rise dramatically. Our home values in Chapel Hill have doubled in 6 years. Some of that has to do with the pandemic, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that people desperately want to live here, and we've run out of land for large lot single-family homes. There were some bills in the legislature that I know Denzel was advocating for that would have helped us create by right options for smaller lots. And I think working together to tackle changes to minimum lot sizes, changes to floor area ratio requirements, changes to height requirements, anything that blocks, 2 to 4 family unit configurations and ADUs is really important. And I have a comment I want to make later about an initial step towards unlocking more ADU supply. But we also see that in Chapel Hill, to fully meet the need for affordable housing, what our community partners have articulated, and I'm happy to see Community Home Trust on this call, one of our really important partners. What our partners have articulated is it would take $50 million for us to fully meet the need for rental assistance, unit creation, naturally occurring affordable housing preservation, all the different types of help that people need to get into housing that they can afford. And we passed our largest ever affordable housing bond recently, and it was $15 million. So there's a $50 million need. The town has 15 million of capacity. We are looking to state and federal partners for help. And from the state, we get very, very little right now. And I think there's a lot of opportunity even within the political challenges of our climate. Obviously, as a town councilor in one of the most famously liberal towns in North Carolina, my relationship with the legislature is complicated. And also, as a guy on a town council who only got elected 2 years ago, it's not a very extensive relationship because I just don't know who most of these people are. But I do think that there are common interests in terms of the economy and the workforce, and there are policies that would benefit Chapel Hill that would also benefit the rest of the state. And I want to talk briefly about a couple of things there. One thing that would really help us is if we could use state funds to provide construction loans at a lower interest rate than market rate. Commercial loans and private equity expect a high rate of return, both because of risk and because the market has supported that up until now. I think we're hitting a period where there is sort of saturation in the market for a lot of these higher end apartment buildings for large lot single family homes. You probably saw that Redfin report recently that there were 500,000 more sellers on the market than buyers. That doesn't affect a town like Chapel Hill very much so far because the demand to be here for our school system and the university is so high. What does affect our town is that as those home prices have doubled, our school system, which is ranked #1 in the state by a bunch of different organizations, it has a deficit of 1,200 children. So the #1 school district in the state is 1,200 kids short, and every single one of those kids takes with them state matching funds to the school system. So the school is losing money because parents cannot afford to buy a home in this community and aren't interested in renting an apartment to live here. That is a challenge that I think the state can intercede in because, for example, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I think, do not typically help with ADUs. I think that condo loan packaging is really difficult. So we do not get for sale supply because the loan products aren't there to support it. And I think one of the most technical and therefore least polarizing fixes to something like this is to use state funding to unlock different interest rates and to secure different construction types that simply aren't in the market right now. And the beauty of an approach like that is that we aren't taking anybody's business, so nobody has a reason to oppose it. If nobody is building ADUs right now, and we say, hey, here's a bill that would unlock support to construct this stuff and open a new market sector, it means additional economic activity without detracting from anybody else's business. If we are failing to provide housing at a price point that is appealing and affordable to a large swath of workers, let's say in the 80 to 140% of AMI range, which I think is true, then anything that we do to unlock housing in that price range is meeting a critical desire in the marketplace. It is stimulating the economy, it is producing new tax revenue, and it's doing so without taking anything away from someone who would then come in and lobby to oppose it. So we do need changes to unlock supply to the regulations affecting towns. There were bills in the legislature that weren't perfect, but that would have taken steps toward doing that. We do need new construction forms to be legalized. The single stair bill cannot come fast enough. We need that bill. And we need the state's help to adjudicate interesting questions. For example, there's a manufactured housing plant right across the border in South Carolina. If somebody wants to build manufactured housing, they need that whole loan up front to build it. If I'm building an apartment complex, I'm going to build 10% of it with my own capital, and then the bank will come and say, okay, you're legit, here's the rest of your loan. Nobody wants to loan for manufactured housing because of the risk involved in giving you all of the money up front to manufacture a product. And once it's manufactured, you put it on a truck and ship it somewhere, and there are, I think, judicially unresolved questions about ownership. So we have these innovative new construction techniques and materials, and we need the state's help to say, how do we bring these to market as quickly as possible to meet this urgent need in a way that just gets supply into the market? So I know I've covered a lot of topics and I've done so without visual aids, but I hope that that plants some seeds for interest and for interesting conversations. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you all and be here with you today.
Thank you, Theo. Great ideas. I've been very interested in the manufactured home concept myself. So to be able to hear somebody lift that up as a way to, as well as tiny homes, a couple other vehicles to be able to bring down price points around building. I see Lily Mae, you back? You want to take over now?
Sure. Again, thank you, Bert and Theo, for those dynamic shares. If anyone has any questions that you'd like to ask them or Denzel as it relates to what they shared, what's happening in this realm of work, feel free to come off mute because it is a smaller group and ask the question that you have. Or if you'd like to put it in the chat, you can do so as well. So while I wait to see if anyone puts anything in the chat here, just want to also remind you to stay connected on social media, NC Housing Table on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. This replay will also be available if you joined a little bit late. Also, if you're interested in being a featured voice, feel free to email me with the topic that you have in mind to share, because this is a monthly workshop series where we'll continue to bring you dynamic voices from around the state. And I'll put my email in the chat if anyone needs it. Denzel also mentioned some poll data that was collected, and you can view that full poll data on our website, nchousingtable.org. That's nchousingtable.org, so that you can view the full poll data. So I'm going to throw it over to Susan for her question.
Thanks. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your flow there. So okay, I am intrigued by like the financial pieces of this. I feel like most of the work that I have done so far, and I work for an environmental policy advocacy organization, so our sort of time energy is more on like efficient use of land and building in and up to avoid sprawl. But just very intrigued by like because housing is such a financial market, like what other things need to happen there. And so I'm curious, Theo, of the ideas that you were putting out there around like the ways that the state could influence or change some of those mechanisms. Are there groups that are, is there momentum on those things? Who was talking about that? Who was working on that? Where is that happening? Curious.
Yeah, so I was talking to Martin about this recently. There is a bill in Florida that has been used to do this. And then at the local level, I can say Chapel Hill has a revolving loan fund that we created in partnership with UNC Health. So that's $25 million, I think. And depending on the length of the loan, you can maybe get through 3 cycles of using that cash before that commitment expires for using it. There so I talked to an expert at UNC about this the other day, Eric Maraboyak. There is a program in Montgomery County, I want to say in Maryland, where they are using bond funds in an innovative way. I'm not aware of any state that has taken the lead on creating a state level fund that is available for construction under specific conditions. And I talked to the governor's team about this, and I think they too want to know where the models are. But my stance is we're in crisis nationwide, and North Carolina has an opportunity to lead. We should take it. I do think that there are some safe ways to pilot this. I think that for ADUs in particular, if the state wanted to start out with a fund, people have a challenge getting a second mortgage to build an ADU. If they want to refinance their mortgage, often in order to cover the cost of construction, they have to get an appraiser to revalue their house with the value it would have once the ADU is constructed in order to qualify for a sufficiently large mortgage to build it. So there's a lot of unfamiliar process components in the market that the state could help to deal with. The state could also agree to provide security for projects, so we could get, say, regional banks who we could talk to from a state perspective if there was buy-in. Governor's office, the legislature, whoever could be the ones to say, look, we want to convene you. We would like to pilot a fund of $50 million for ADU construction. The state will secure the fund. My personal favorite idea is that if you want to get workforce housing for the 100 to 140% AMI, you would basically say we can use, for example, the pension fund. We could take a portion of that, put it into this, index the return to be the federal treasury rate +1, essentially. So you're beating inflation. And then you say these projects are legal by right if you're participating in this loan fund. So you've removed the risk of a housing investment from the pension portfolio, which obviously you want to be a low risk investment vehicle. And you have said we're creating a capital flow for different kinds of housing. So there's a lot of different creative ideas that I think we could pursue. And I think starting small with a really successful ADU pilot would be a great place to begin.
Did anyone else have a question they would like to ask Theo, Bert, or Denzel?
I'm curious because I see Bert nodding because we are going to try to convene a table with the finance community soon, because they are the silent majority that need to be in this conversation, them and as well as the insurance folks. I've been thinking about this a lot. But I'm curious to point, because we don't talk about finance much in terms of the work. How does what Theo presented fit in the scope of planning and decision making, if there were availability from a planning standpoint? Because Theo's kind of giving it from kind of a macro, but from planning perspective, if the construction costs and allocations were there, how would that either alleviate or add more? I'm just curious.
Well, I think obviously there's like the financial component is really important, right? You always need a place to put the housing, and then you need a way to afford it, and then you need someone to build it, and then you need someone to live in it, right? So it's like all the pieces kind of need to work together. I mean, if I use, I'm gonna use a couple of like super hyper local examples, right? Because there is no state level or even local level way to move construction forward. There are some groups I've noticed kind of popping up, figuring out other ways to finance things like ADUs. So there's a group that's starting in Raleigh right now. They're called Cardinal ADU. And they are putting together a group of financing, builders, architects, etc. And the goal there is to manage the process of building ADUs. It's very specific to Raleigh. But they figured out really early on that part of that, so Raleigh changed their ordinance and they allowed ADUs, right? And in certain circumstances, you can have 2 ADUs on the same property, right? Going over that gets more complicated because you change yourself from residential code to commercial code, and then you have to like sprinkler buildings, and then just the cost gets a little bit astronomical. But Raleigh changed the code, but has not built that many ADUs. And the reason why is because it costs too much to build them and people can't finance them. It's basically what Theo just described. So there are some private sector responses to fill that gap, to figure out how to do it. And builders have been doing this for a long time, like build to own, like owner financing, construction loans through the builder that you're using versus through a bank. But there are banks that are specifically set up to do this in California. And they are looking to expand themselves into our market. So there are conversations ongoing there. That doesn't really answer your question, but I'm just saying that financing piece is really important. But I am going to add, there was one piece of what Theo said, which was really important, which is by right development. And when I stress the importance of that, it's not to say public input is not important. Public input went into building the plan. When people are trying to implement your plan, let them go do it. So if you have adopted plans and policies that say, yeah, we would like housing here next to transit, why do I need to ask you again? And then ask you another time, and then ask you again in another forum? That is ridiculous. And what you're doing is lengthening that time street. So the average, I asked, this is anecdotal evidence, I didn't do a survey. The average cost of a rezoning in Raleigh is at minimum $150,000, right? And it takes about a year. That entire time you're carrying the cost of the land, and you are paying your attorney $150,000 to help you walk through the process, because it is so complicated now that you can no longer do it yourself as an owner or even as a designer. Designers are no longer able to represent in front of the planning commission. You are adding the cost and time in a way that is not helpful for your end goal, which is, if your goal is to get more housing, you need to get more housing. That's why I think so many of the decisions at the very hyper local level are made around a municipal election cycle, right? When you zoom out to a state level and start making decisions there, like ADUs by right? Now, no longer do I need to ask 57 people if I can put an ADU in my backyard, right? Because it's allowed. That's allowed by right. There is an allowance at the state level for an accessory dwelling unit anywhere in the state if it is health related. So if you have a sick or aging parent, you are allowed to put a medical ADU on your property. A lot of people don't know that. I think that's kind of an important piece. So the framework for creating the policy to allow ADUs by right, just as an example, it's already there. So I think it's just taking that next step and then helping people to be able to pay for those things, which is exactly what Theo was addressing.
I anybody? Oh, I see David saying. I'm gonna go ahead, David. I'm gonna let you.
Oh no, that's no problem. I'm just gonna I'm just thinking in terms of housing. I think someone put in the chat in terms of density in North Carolina, and that's been a issue in trying to determine what was an appropriate density. Sensitive, it's a sensitive subject. One thing I would promote also, as someone mentioned, we're not building more land. You're talking about Chapel Hill. I think we don't include the environment enough in the conversation. Wetland areas, and so as we sprawl and build closer out, we build near these natural areas, and so that's why it's going to be important for us, Denzel, to find out density, because ecosystem services play a major part in what we do. But I think it could be something. It could be that sweet spot when we're talking about General Assembly, when we're talking about housing and increasing it. We can't continue to build near these sensitive wetland areas, and the only areas that are left, um, large lot zoning and all that stuff, it just, the numbers don't add up. But I think using the environment as a tool, as a way of showing that, hey, we're going to have to really assess, what we build, how much we can build. Um, just want to throw that in, Denzel and Lily May.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I want to make mention that one of the things that were a part of which was now dead and defunct, but 765 was a conversation and intersection between the farm community and some of the conservation folks, because it has been pretty much everyone's opinion that density essentially, and I think Martin always throws this factoid out about North Carolina has more farmland per capita than most states in the South. And so as a kind of intersectional tie-in, we were trying to get the farm community, the agriculture community to buy in so that we can protect more of the rural farmland, but that requires folks to essentially densify and willing to go up. But I think this is the piece that I'm glad that Theo and Bert are here, because they hear these phrases that it's these technical terms that are hard to compete with. Like one that's been coming up a lot is aesthetics and charm, right? Affordability is subjective, right? Affordability to what I might be able to experience within the area I live in and compared to somebody else, those things are nuanced across the state. One of the other conversations that came up was around, and I'm interested from both Theo and Bert, to this piece, was about shot clock provisions, because we are seeing timelines be exaggerated from the point, like the idea of planning from what we got from the city of Raleigh, what Bert put up initially, ideally is wonderful. Like it should be a streamlined process, but we're not seeing that. So you're going 200, maybe 24 months out, and now that person, whomever is doing development, mostly smaller groups, are holding on and being eat up by time and money, which that cost essentially is going to get rolled over to said homeowner or community. So I guess I'm curious, Theo and Bert, from your perspective, in terms of those pieces, and this is great because we're going to have to take all this and put it into a policy doc. Where do you see, because of course the conversation about localization came up, and I'm not going to put you in that quagmire, Theo, but the shot clock piece to help, working through the planning process. I'm very curious, Bert, after I have to get off of this call and have another conversation with the governor's office, what, from you and Theo's perspective, would be a sweet spot for that?
Theo, I don't know if you want to go first.
I'll give it a shot, but my answer is not going to be very satisfying, I think, because when I've talked to some developers here trying to figure out, I haven't heard from any of them that the turnaround time is a huge barrier. What I have heard is that there's no air traffic controller in the process. So if I'm a developer coming to the town and I say, look, here's a parcel of land, I want to put this building on it, then you're going to go through several phases of review, which are fairly prompt, but there's no necessarily pressure to get all the comments in the first phase that would ever come out. And when those comments are coming, you're going to get, this department has 12, that department has 15, that department only has 3, but they're really expensive. that department has 17. It starts to add up. And, what folks will usually tell me is none of these asks on their own, no 10 of these asks are going to kill the project. What kills it is I have to guess which of them are actually critical for staff and council support without knowing. And if I get that guess wrong, my costs go up. Maybe if it's conditional zoning, the council says no, and I'm out a bunch of money and time and there's no building. And the challenge for them is not even that there's a conditional zoning process at that point, it's that there's no final arbiter who says, here's our set of comments. These 10 are must-dos for approval. These 15 are, we really want them, but they're not absolute must-dos. And these 30 are like, look, if you can do it, please do. And that a lot of folks say, like, if you're doing a conditional zoning, that would be helpful. So that's my permit answer there.
And in Raleigh, where I am right now, there is a shot clock, and it's very helpful, I guess, in terms of getting things through the rezoning process. But the shot clock, there's a preamble before the shot clock starts, and then there's stuff after the shot clock, which is part of the legislative decision. So it doesn't clock the entirety of the process. It just clocks what staff do, which is easier to control, right? So it solves part of the problem, but not the entirety of the problem. And to really solve the problem would be to think again about what really needs to go through a rezoning process. Like, why aren't certain things by right? So I don't have to go through that part of the process. I still would have to go through like a building review process, like much like what Theo stated. So, so the shot clock is great for controlling one aspect of it, but there are so many other moving parts that, quite frankly, I think you need to be on another court, right? Like it's.
Appreciate that. I don't want to belabor it. No, it's close to the hour. I want to thank you, Lily. May I give it back to you? If there was anyone else that had maybe another question, I guess, outside of me, this was me just pulling on these brilliant minds as I'm thinking about how we can inform the work. I want to thank Susan from Mountain True also chiming in. Lily May, I'll give it back to you.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much, Bert and Theo, for blessing us with your time today and your insights. Again, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So if anyone, wanted to participate as a featured voice in one of our future workshops, you could definitely send me your information, the topic that you would like to speak on, and so forth. Also, we always like to do a few Starbucks gift card giveaways as a thank you for those of you who tuned in today. So simply go over to our Instagram page and leave a comment under our last post, and we will be pulling 2 of those comments as a Starbucks gift card winner. Our next virtual workshop is actually going to be on July 22nd, if you want to save that date on your calendar, but we will, of course, send out more details via the newsletter. Also, you can expect invitations for future in-person events as well to come through the newsletter, as well as action alerts, advocacy opportunities, partnership opportunities. So definitely, keep an eye on the newsletter that we send out on a regular basis. Thank you again for everyone tuning in. Those are all of the notes that I have, and I will look forward to hopefully seeing everyone here collectively on July 22nd. I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you.